This is 11 things that you won't like about Classic World of Warcraft. Lots of people have talked about the differences between the current game and what to expect from Classic. I'm about to dive into the details, and if you weren't around back in the day, give you some expectations, what you will likely miss, but also give you some reasons as to why the old ways might not be such a bad thing. Number 1. Mounts. In vanilla, you had to walk everywhere. And I don't mean ride everywhere. I mean exactly what I said. You walk everywhere. Basic mount training will only unlock at level 40, and you will not be able to afford your mount. Unless you plan for it every second of the day, I guarantee that the first time you get a character to level 40, you are not going to be able to afford that mount. Including the training and one mount, the total price tag will be 100 gold. Excluding reputation discounts. Unless they keep the changes that they've made, the price scheme for mounts will be back to the original method as well, which would mean that the training to ride is actually the cheaper purchase, and the majority of the price is actually in buying the individual mount. This made collecting mounts extremely expensive at the time, even without mounts designed specifically to be a gold sink. 100% speed riding unlocked at max level, level 60, and the price tag was 1,000 gold combined for both the training and the mounts themselves. Most level 60s, in my experience, did not have their tier 2 riding for a long time, unless they played constantly, or maybe they played the AH, during their spare moments. I had some schemes to make gold while leveling back in the day. Level 15 and 20 I could be found fishing along the coast, gathering skins, mining ore, and there beside me, without fail, would be the occasional level 60 trying their darndest to scrape up just a little more gold. They would try absolutely everything. They would sell fish, they would sell cooked items. It was outrageous, and there was a lot of competition for farming gold back in the day, for getting things which other people wanted, because of exactly this reason. Everything was expensive and gold was very hard to find, and mounts were extremely expensive. One other thing, Warlocks and Paladins did receive a free mount at level 40. I can't recall exactly if there was a little quest attached at the level 40 mount, but the bottom line here is you didn't have to pay the toll. It's one of the reasons that I rolled an Undead Warlock, and I suspect a lot of other people made that same choice. However, when you get to level 60 on a Warlock or a Paladin, there is a very substantial quest for epic riding. And those quests were extraordinarily difficult. I did the one on my Warlock, and it's really taxing, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. Number 2, flying. Obviously, there will be no flying in Classic. There was no flying anywhere in Azeroth. The noble citizens of Azeroth were unaccustomed to the finer points of flight, and on the whole, they thought it was a silly affair. That was until they saw it. Once BC was announced, everyone was looking forward to flying, and once they had it, they began to ask why it wasn't in the original game. By the time the Lich King rolled around, they were furiously groveling and pleading so that they might have flight in the old game. However, that was impossible. Nobody knew that Orgrimmar, and indeed, all of the original game had in fact been manufactured by Chinese construction developers. The places we knew from the original game were made out of cardboard, glue, and paper, and if you cast a spell at just the wrong time and in just the wrong place, you could literally fall through the world in vanilla, right up until you smacked into a kill wall or you opened a ticket. In Cataclysm, we finally had our wish granted. Everything we knew about the old world changed, and things were finally looking up. It was clear skies from here on out. We all knew that. Or at least that's what we thought until, subscriber numbers tanked. Moving on, you will not have any access to any player-controlled flight in Classic. Anywhere. And if you didn't experience the zones pre-Cata, they'll be very different from what you're used to. Number 3. Portals. This should go without saying, but as with all other forms of movement that have been made so easy in recent years, portals are not going to be an option for you to get around. There will be no portals in major cities. There will be no portals to other main cities. I can hear you saying, but mages will have portals, and they can give a free port to anybody, idiot. No. Mage portals in vanilla, and so likely in Classic as well, require reagents. You heard me right. Mages had to use items in order to cast spells. I'll get more into that later. But it wasn't uncommon for mages in capital cities to sell these services, along with selling water and food to people, sometimes. Selling portals in capital cities to other places in the world. They would even advertise this in trade chat. Even if you were to find a mage benevolent enough to offer you a portal for free, it was pretty common to tip back in the day for everything from portals to lockpicking all the way to enchanting and disenchanting. Movement is probably going to be walking, riding, taking boats, and taking Zeppelin if you're Horde. It's just something you're going to have to get used to unless you're really lucky or running a mage. Number 4. Items. Point 1. There will be no heirlooms at all. Moving on. Point 2. This is going to be controversial, but greens are actually rare. I know online databases and the game itself will tell you that greens are uncommon, but I'm here to tell you that isn't the truth. Greens are rare. It's easy to forget that in our current state of the game. Don't believe me? That's fine. Just give Classic a spin and see if you think that holds up. Helmets and shoulders are basically unicorns, and the first ones you find are usually going to be white in quality. I didn't get shoulders on my main character until I was past 20, and finding headgear was even worse. Eventually getting a green had a similar level of excitement as losing your virginity. I assume that anyway. I don't actually know what that feels like. But it felt good to get that green, and even better to get blues. This carried straight on through to the end of the game as well. Most active level 60s will be decked out in deep blue for a very long time. This did have the added bonus of making the hardcore raiders and PvPers, and anyone sporting sets of purple gear with a purple weapon, well, they were amazing to behold. And it was akin to seeing a walking legend. Top-tier content runners today can't even come close to matching the awe that was inspired by vanilla ballers walking the streets of Orgrimmar or Ironforge. You knew exactly what they were wearing and where they got their gear from, and could at least guess at the bewildering number of times and hours and countless raids that it would have taken to even get a chance at seeing one of those items drop. It really gives everyone a sense of wonder, raised people's expectations, and spurred people to become legends themselves. That guy over there, he's wearing gear made of dragon scales. He killed the broodmother of the Black Dragonflight. You can't help but think, damn, that guy is badass. Number 5. Quests. Quests in Classic will be very different compared to today. The first difference you'll likely to notice is that, without interface add-ons, you aren't going to automatically be directed to your destination on your map or your minimap. This may come as a surprise, but you're probably going to have to read, or watch some of my videos where I provide quest narration. Quests usually involved more than one element, and in the old days, if you didn't properly go over your objectives, you probably weren't going to meet all the requirements of a given text. Additionally, once you've remembered how to read, there's another bombshell. There aren't enough quests in the game. Period. I've seen different estimates on how the exact numbers work out, but the bottom line is that there simply weren't enough. The developers made up for this by making drop rates extremely low for certain quest items. You'll know what I mean when you find bears without asses, headless raptors, and hoofless zebras. Even upon completing every quest you can possibly find everywhere in the world, you're going to have to make up the difference by running dungeons, which you should probably do anyway for gear, and through the time-tested method of grinding. Number 6. Difficulty. Yes, like you've heard, Classic WoW will be more difficult, but not in a mechanical way, but in terms of pure power and numbers. OG WoW is going to be harder because enemies will have more health. You will have less health. Enemies will hit harder. You will not hit very hard at all. Armor and weapons are more difficult to obtain, and there will be more competition for that gear. This is partly because there is not instanced loot in vanilla. There wasn't instanced loot for most of World of Warcraft's history. Also, there will be more competition for gear. Warriors and paladins will use mail up to level 40, and at level 40, shamans and hunters will begin to wear mail, after switching from leather. Believe it or not, some warriors and paladins will still compete for the mail gear even though they should be using plate, simply because they haven't gotten an upgrade yet, or because they like the stats better, or for whatever reason. Even something as simple as wiping becomes more difficult. Wiping for days on end wasn't something you could do forever in vanilla. The process itself was cost prohibitive. Plate costs more to repair than cloth, tanks get hit more, and then they die on top of it. Even with pooled gold, you and your group will run out of resources eventually. There were fewer mechanics back in the day, and they were easier to dodge for the most part, but that generally punished you extremely hard when you failed to meet the demands of the boss. Not in terms of 100% instant deaths, for the most part, just crushing numbers. Things may not be fair, but you'll get used to it, and it's just a different challenge than most of us are accustomed to now. Number 7. Balance. World of Warcraft, in the beginning, and to this day to some extent, was not balanced. It just was not balanced at all. Some classes had stuns, others simply didn't. Some classes could heal, others absolutely could not. Blizzard has made many changes in the intervening years. Some things that come to mind are diminishing returns, damage revamps, reworking all specs to have some soloing viability, resilience, many other things. I really miss the old way of doing things, and I've described it to my friends this way. Basically, the world we see now in Azeroth is flat, where everyone pretty much has a chance against everyone else, no matter what. WoW is an example of symmetrical balance, or at least that's what Blizzard is trying to make. WoW in the beginning was an example of asymmetrical balance. Yes, paladins could stun, but their damage from minute to minute was lower than most. Yes, rogues could stun and had insane damage, but they could not heal without food, potions, or bandages. Yes, shamans couldn't stun, and their damage was lower on average than most classes. However, if you were running enhancement, their burst was kind of like slamming an open bag of Mentos into a soda bottle and screwing the lid back on. And it simply goes on from there. Sure, mages could completely reset a fight and prevent damage, and made their own food, and had a slow, and stuns, and movement locks, and chill, and skills and talents meant something. And not every class could do most everything. Sure, it means that you aren't a Swiss Army knife, but it made your character more memorable and unique because of that. It made every other class interesting and unique because of what they could do. Plus, if Swifty taught us anything, it's that knowledge is power. Those who know in vanilla were more powerful than those who don't. Number 8. Skills. As you leveled up in vanilla, you would get newer, better ranks of spells and abilities. I'm sorry, did I say get? Because I really meant buy. You get spells and abilities now. Doesn't matter what you do. If you level up, you're going to get those spells. In vanilla, every time that you level up, you needed to go back to your trainer and check to see if you got a new rank upgrade for the spells and abilities that you've already purchased from your trainer. Now, those spells and abilities would usually increase the damage or increase the potency if it's a spell, and you might think it's just useless, you know? When you open up your spell book and you're playing vanilla, all of your older spells and abilities are going to be there. Even though, you know, the newest one is obviously more powerful, so why are they still around? Well, in vanilla, you may want to use a lower ranked version of a spell rather than using the top rank. Now, sometimes you might have a talent which procced by using a particular ability, so you can keep that talent proc up on your target without using a whole bunch of mana. Or maybe you wanted a particular buff or debuff to remain on your target for longer, Or maybe, your target is only missing a little bit of health if you're a healer. Or because maybe you were a fire mage and you only used Frostbolt for slowing people down. You didn't want to waste the rest of the mana. Another thing that you're likely to find is that there are a whole lot of spells. You may have one specialization, let's say Affliction for warlocks. That doesn't mean you aren't going to have access to all of the normal spells from other specializations. Now, you won't have ones that are unlocked by talent points deeper in your talent tree, but as far as it goes, if you're running Affliction, you're still going to have access to Immolate and Conflagrate and other things that would normally be the purview of a Destruction Warlock. So in that regard, it actually opens you up to being more useful in certain situations. Say your target is immune to shadow damage, you can use fire damage if you're a warlock. You can switch it up because there is resistance, but that's another topic. The same goes for all these other classes. If you're a mage and you're fire spec, well, you can actually still use some of the frost spells, or most of the frost spells for that matter, most of the arcane spells, unless it's in a talent tree. And even then it has to be pretty deep, because once you finish a talent tree, you still have enough points at level 60 to put some points into other trees and gain a little bit of ability from another specialization. It's kind of like 1 1/3 or 1 1/2, somewhere around there. But you will have a lot of access to other spells that in the current game in Battle for Azeroth, you just won't have that, variability. The utilitarian aspect of using most of what your class has to offer at any given time, regardless of your specialization. Number 9. Class expectations. Like I said before, not every class could do everything, and you will probably miss that. If you are a warrior, you will be expected to tank, either primarily or as a backup. And you may be thinking, that's no problem, bruh, I'll just switch specs. Okay, how? I'll tell you how. Your skill trainer, located in a major city, the guy who sells you new, expensive versions of skills you already have. That guy will refund your talent points for a price, an expensive price. And once that is done, you can respec. However, each time you do this, it costs more gold, until it caps out at 50 gold. It's a very price-prohibitive process back in vanilla and probably in classic as well. This meant that when you had a role, you were probably going to stick with it. Not only that, your friends and guildmates expected you to stick with that role. So, back to the list. I already mentioned warriors. Paladins, you're going to be expected to heal. Druids, you're also going to be expected to heal. Yeah, I know both of them could tank, and if you had enough healers, well, they could do damage, but most of the time, for most people, just prepare for that expectation. Shamans, same deal. You were really expected to heal. Although at lower levels they could actually tank. Blizzard abandoned that in a heartbeat. Earthshock generated high threat in vanilla, and Mail plus a shield meant that you could take a hit. At least one. Priests were obviously expected to heal, even though they could melt pretty faces into noxious void goo in PvP. Hunters, warlocks, rogues, and mages were obviously damage dealers. However, because of limited mana and mana regeneration, rogues could sometimes be more useful because they could sustain during long raid fights, where the mage might simply be tapped out. Although, mages actually had a little bit more utility back in the day, being able to cast Dampen and Amplify magic, which not only works against enemy spells, but also work to improve or reduce healing as well. And they also had curse removal. Warlocks had a little better sustain from life tap, but you were essentially trading a healer's mana for damaging mana. Hunters, by the way, did use mana back in vanilla, and hunters did not have mana generating or sustain abilities like they have now. Their damage would eventually drop off some from lack of mana, but they would still be able to maintain some damage through pets and auto shots while recovering that mana. Here's another thought though. Hunters also had to use ammunition back in the day, either by having bullets if they used a gun, or by having arrows if they used a bow. Last point, I mentioned this earlier during the portal section, but mages weren't the only ones who needed reagents. I needed to fit this in somewhere, so here it goes. Priests needed them for things like Power Word for putting it on the whole group. Paladins used it for divine intervention. Druids used reagents for Gift of the Wild and Rebirth. Shamans used them for reincarnation. Warlocks needed reagents for their Infernal and Doomguard summons. And even rogues had to buy reagents for their poison. Let's not forget, warlocks also had soul stones. There were also items called soul bags, which could only hold soul stones. They were very large bags, usually larger than the normal bags you would be using at a given level. And that's all they could hold. Both the stones and the bags were exclusive to warlocks, and pretty much any summon ability is going to require a stone, as well as higher level abilities. And if you run out, rather than waiting around for the stones to regenerate on their own, they're not going to come back. You're going to have to go and kill something and use Drained Soul to get a new stone. Number 10, Guilds. I left this for last for a reason. I feel like it sums up a lot of what I miss about vanilla compared to the current game today. Ever since Wrath, I haven't fit in with a guild. Sometimes I'll log on, say hi to my guild. It doesn't really matter which group we're talking about, Alliance or Horde. No matter which guild I try, I will log on, say something, other people are online, and I will not get a response for days, if ever. You know, these guilds, they have members, they just don't really care. They don't read. For the most part, the people, at least as they interact online, they really aren't friendly at all. And sure, in vanilla, you couldn't store items in a guild bank. There was no communistic system of sharing repair bills. There was no central location for hoarding vast numbers of reagents and gear and herbs and ore. There was none of that. However, in vanilla, simply completing one quest chain usually meant that you would need help. And if you had to fight an elite, you needed friends. Guilds existed because people needed each other. If you've ever started a guild simply to have a big pocket where you can store all of your items, or to farm gold passively during the cash flow days, or for guild perks, or mounts, or heirlooms, or anything like that, go ahead and kiss that goodbye. Guilds weren't for any of that. Guilds existed so that you and a bunch of other people could have a chance at playing the game together. And if I can get 1/10 of that community back, Classic will be worth it to me.